My parents said my brother was the future. They paid for his degree and told me to get a job instead. I stayed quiet and worked. 2 years later, my dad was watching the news. Then slowly sat up. The expert explaining the breakthrough had my name under it. My father sat up slowly in his recliner. My cousin Brianna was there that Tuesday evening, visiting like she sometimes did, and she watched the whole thing happen in real time. She said he just stiffened. The beer in his hand forgotten, going warm, while the television kept talking. The way televisions do, indifferent to the silence filling a room. The name on the screen was mine. Marlene. Dr. Marlene Okafor. The researcher explaining a national news story about a medical breakthrough. His daughter. The one he told to go get a job. But we're not there yet. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. In a house where love had a hierarchy nobody ever named out loud. My parents, Gary and Roberta, weren't cruel. That's what makes it complicated. They went to church, kept the lawn neat, remembered neighbors' birthdays. Good people by every visible measure. But inside that house there was my brother Cody. And then there was me. Cody was 3 years younger. And by the time we were teenagers it had become quietly, undeniably clear that he occupied a different category in my parents' minds. Dad coached his baseball. Mom drove 40 minutes each way to his travel games. When Cody struggled in algebra, they hired a tutor. When I struggled I figured it out myself, which, looking back, was probably the most useful thing they ever accidentally taught me. The moment everything became impossible to ignore was the Sunday evening I sat down at the kitchen table with a folder. 17 years old. A 3.9 GPA, 2 AP courses, a part-time job at the pharmacy on 5th Street, and a letter of interest from a biology program in Cincinnati. I had prepared for that conversation like it was a job interview. My father listened, looked at the folder, looked at my mother. Then he said very calmly, "Marlene, your brother is the future of this family. We've already committed everything to his education. You're a smart girl, you'll find your own way. The future of this family." I've turned that phrase over in my hands more times than I can count, as if I were already something they were moving on from. I didn't argue. I got up, walked to my room, and sat on the edge of my bed until the light outside went from gray to dark. The anger didn't come right away. It arrived slowly, the way water finds its level. So I did exactly what my father said. Found my own way. 2 jobs by 18. I applied for every scholarship I could find. And I mean every single one. My Aunt Dolores, my mother's older sister, sharp and fiercely loyal, called me within a week of hearing what happened at that table. She lived in Kettering, drove a 10-year-old Buick, and had the kind of voice that made you feel like someone was finally in your corner. "Tell me the whole thing," she said. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, which meant she was genuinely moved, because Dolores was never quiet, and then she said, "I'll help where I can. It won't be much. But the part you do yourself, Marlene. That's the part that stays with you." She was right. More right than I knew how to appreciate at the time. I deferred enrollment for a year, saved everything, took out a loan in my own name, and started at the biology program in Cincinnati the following fall. When you pay for every textbook yourself, you work differently. You sit in the front row not because you're eager, but because you are not about to waste what that seat cost you. I came home for Thanksgiving that first year and Cody was deep into his sophomore year at Ohio State. Housing partially covered by my parents. He'd already switched his major once. Nobody mentioned it. My mother asked how school was going. "Really well. I have a research internship lined up for next summer." "Oh, wonderful," she said, and turned to ask Cody about his communications professor. That night I stood in the cold driveway and called Dolores. "I don't know how many more of these dinners I have in me," I told her. She said, "As many as you need. And one day, you won't have to explain yourself at that table anymore." Held on to that. Had to. Because what was coming? The research, the late nights, the moment that would put my name on a national news ticker while my father's beer went warm. None of it was close yet. But it was coming. And I'll tell you exactly how it started. The internship that changed everything almost didn't happen. It paid next to nothing, and I needed every dollar that summer to cover fall tuition. I sat in my apartment doing the math on a legal pad, and the math wasn't working. I was this close to turning it down. Dolores called that evening like she had a sixth sense for my worst moments. I explained the situation. She was quiet for 3 seconds, then said, "How much?" "Dolores, I'm not asking." "How much, Marlene?" I told her. She said she'd wire it by Friday, casual as lending me a sweater. I never forgot that. Not for a single day. The lab was attached to a hospital in Columbus. Small, underfunded, slightly chaotic, and the most alive place I'd ever been. The lead researcher, Dr. Patricia Voss, was silver-haired, fast-talking, and handed me a stack of papers my first morning with instructions to read everything by Thursday and tell her what was wrong with the methodology in Study 3. No welcome speech. No orientation folder. I loved her immediately. On Thursday I told her what I found. She looked at me over her glasses and said, "Took me 6 months to catch that. You have good eyes." That was the whole compliment. I sat in my car afterward just breathing, because nobody in authority had ever said anything like that to me. My parents had received every achievement I'd ever brought home like mild weather. Oh, that's nice. And here was this accomplished woman telling me I had good eyes. It rewired something. I'm not being dramatic. It genuinely rewired something. I went back for my junior year knowing exactly what I was working toward. I also made a quiet decision around that time. I stopped performing for my family. No more going home and recapping my accomplishments hoping someone would finally receive them properly. I visited less. Sunday calls with my mother, brief and warm and surface level. I redirected my energy toward people who were actually feeding me. Dolores noticed immediately. "You seem lighter," she said. "I think I am," I told her. Cody had graduated from Ohio State by then. 5 years, one extra that my parents covered without a word, and moved back to Dayton working in marketing. Good for him, genuinely. He didn't design the system we grew up in. He just benefited from it. But I want to tell you about the last Christmas I spent at that house for a long time. My father looked at me across the dinner table and said, "Still doing the research thing?" The way you ask someone if they've thought this through. "Yes. I'm applying to doctoral programs." He repeated the words slowly. "How long does that take?" 5 or 6 years. Cody said. "That's a long time to be in school." I looked at my brother, who had just taken 5 years to finish a 4-year degree, fully funded, and smiled and said, "It really is." I delivered that line beautifully, if I do say so myself. I got into a doctoral program in Maryland. Packed my car, drove 11 hours, cried for exactly 4 minutes somewhere in Pennsylvania, and kept going. My advisor, Dr. Franklin Adeyemi, had a way of pushing without pressure. He handed you a problem and waited. I thrived there in a way I hadn't anywhere before, because for the first time, nobody needed me to justify myself before I'd even opened my mouth. The work did that. Second year I published my first paper. Small contribution, not a breakthrough, but my name was on it. In print. In a journal. I sent the link to Dolores. She called within 10 minutes, crying before she even said hello. "That's my girl," she said. I sent it to my parents too. My mother replied 2 days later. "Very impressive. Your father says congratulations." He couldn't even type it himself. I put my phone down, went back to the lab and thought, quietly, clearly, keep going. Because something is building, and one day they will understand exactly what they dismissed. I didn't know yet how right I was. The breakthrough didn't arrive like a lightning bolt. That's what nobody tells you about research. You don't wake up one morning with the answer. You wake up, go to the lab, stare at data that almost makes sense, go home, sleep badly, and do it again. For months, sometimes years. The glamorous version, the movie version, skips all of that. It skips the Tuesday afternoons where you genuinely consider whether you chose the right path. I had plenty of those Tuesdays. By my 4th year in Maryland, I was deep into research around cellular inflammation markers. Specifically, a pattern that kept showing up in early-stage data that my advisor and I believed could have implications for how certain autoimmune conditions were detected and treated. Sounds significant when I say it like that. At the time, it mostly felt like a very complicated puzzle that refused to cooperate. Dr. Adeyemi had a saying he repeated whenever the work got frustrating. "The data doesn't owe you clarity. You owe it patience." I wrote that on a sticky note and put it on my monitor. Still there, actually. What was happening at home during those years was a slower, quieter kind of story. Cody had gotten married. A woman named Tiffany, sweet, warm, the kind of person who remembered your coffee order and asked follow-up questions about things you'd mentioned months ago. I liked her immediately and felt slightly guilty about that, like I wasn't supposed to enjoy anything connected to that side of my life. My parents had softened somewhat with age and grandchildren. Cody and Tiffany had a daughter, and suddenly Gary and Roberta had somewhere to put all that warmth they'd been rationing unevenly for years. Good, I thought. Let the baby have it. I visited once that year. Thanksgiving again, because apparently I'm a glutton for a particular kind of punishment. Dolores came too, which helped. Having Dolores in a room is like having a buffer zone. Nobody says anything too stupid when Dolores is there because she will absolutely address it. Dinner was fine until my father asked, with genuine curiosity this time rather than skepticism, how the research was going. I looked at him for a second, recalibrating. Really well, actually, I said. We're close to something. I can't say much yet, but we're close. He nodded, went back to his food. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an acknowledgement of anything. But it was the first time in memory that he'd asked without the undertone of, "Is this still a thing you're doing?" And I filed it away. I'm not sure why. Maybe because even when someone has hurt you, you still collect the small signs that they're capable of being different. Or maybe I was just tired of being angry. Anger is exhausting to maintain, especially from 11 hours away. The paper that changed everything came out of 18 months of work that I am not going to pretend was linear or clean because it was neither. There were 3 of us on the core research team by that point. Myself, a postdoc named Dr. Simone Warwick who was brilliant and perpetually undercaffeinated, and a visiting researcher from Atlanta named Marcus Webb who had a gift for statistical modeling that made the rest of us feel mildly inadequate. We worked well together in that specific way that happens when everyone in the room is more interested in the problem than in the credit. The finding itself, I'll spare you the technical language, essentially identified a previously overlooked inflammatory marker that appeared consistently in early-stage data for a specific autoimmune condition. Which sounds incremental. And in one sense it was. But the implications for earlier detection, for intervention before significant damage occurred, were significant enough that when we submitted the paper, it moved through peer review faster than anything I'd been part of before. Dr. Adeyemi read the reviewer comments and looked up at me and said, "They want revisions, but Marlene, they want revisions because they're taking it seriously." I understood what he meant. Serious rejection looks different from serious interest. We published 8 months later. I want to tell you what I felt the day it went live because it wasn't what I expected. I thought I'd feel triumphant. Vindicated, maybe. I thought I'd think about my father and his future of the family speech and feel the satisfaction of having proven something. Instead I just felt full. Complete in a quiet way. Like something that had been slightly out of alignment for years had clicked into place. The work was good. I knew it was good. And for the first time in my life that was genuinely enough. Called Dolores. "It's published," I said. She made a sound I don't have a word for. Part cry, part laugh, part something else entirely. "Marlene," she said, "do you understand what you've done?" "I think so," I said. "Yeah, I think I do." I didn't call my parents. Not that day. I told myself it was because I needed the moment to be mine first before I shared it. Which was true. But also, and I can admit this now, part of me wanted the news to find them on its own terms. In its own time. I didn't realize how literally that would happen. I didn't know that a few weeks later, a producer at a national news network would call our university's communications department. That they'd want an interview. That it would air on a Tuesday evening. That my father would be sitting in his recliner with a beer going warm in his hand. That Brianna would be there watching his face when the name came up on screen. I didn't know any of that yet. But something was coming. And honestly, after everything, it couldn't come fast enough. The interview request came through the university's communications office on a Wednesday morning. A producer from a national network had seen the paper and wanted to explain the findings to a general audience. Early detection. Autoimmune disease. Real implications for real people. I said yes immediately and then spent the next 48 hours quietly panicking. Standing in a lab arguing methodology with people who speak your language is one thing. Sitting in front of a camera explaining your work to several million people who don't is something else entirely. I called Dolores the night before and told her I was considering faking a stomach illness. She said, "Marlene, if you fake a stomach illness I will drive to Maryland and give you a real one." So I went. The segment was 4 minutes long. I said essentially one too many times. The anchor was professional and kind, and my name sat on the lower third of the screen for most of it. Dr. Marlene Okafor, molecular biology researcher. I watched the clip back once, closed my laptop, ordered takeout, and tried to treat it like a normal Tuesday. It was not a normal Tuesday. Brianna called the next morning. We'd stayed close through everything. She had that rare quality of seeing the full picture without taking sides, and she chose her moments carefully. She was not calm. "I was at your parents' house last night," she said. "Your segment came on. Marlene, your dad sat up slowly like he needed to make sure what he was seeing was real. Didn't say a word the entire time. When it ended, he walked to the kitchen and stood at the sink for a while. And then he came back, sat down, and said quietly, to nobody in particular, "That's my daughter." I let that sit for a moment. Did he sound proud, I asked. Or did he sound like someone who'd just realized something? Brianna thought about it honestly. "Both," she said. "Honestly, both." My mother called that afternoon. Longest conversation we'd had in years. She started with, "You looked wonderful, the lighting was good." Her way of warming up, and eventually got to it. "Your father and I are very proud of you. We've always been proud of you." That word. Always. Doing a lot of heavy lifting. "Mom," I said gently but clearly, "you told me you couldn't invest in my education because Cody was the future of the family. Paid for everything myself. I need us to both say that out loud. Not to argue just because it's true." Silence. Then, "You're right. That wasn't fair." Not a full apology, but an acknowledgement, and for some people that's as close as they can get. It wasn't enough on its own, but it was a start. My father called 4 days later, early on a Saturday. I stood in my kitchen looking at his name on my screen before I answered. "That was something," he said after a long pause. "What you've done. That's really something." Part of me wanted to make it easier for him, the way you do with people you love even when they've hurt you. But the part of me that had worked 2 jobs at 18, driven 11 hours alone, and paid for every single textbook, that part needed him to get there himself. So I just said, "Thank you, Dad," and waited. "I think," he said slowly, "I didn't see you clearly. For a long time. I got some things wrong." "Yeah," I said quietly. "You did." Neither of us spoke for a moment. And that silence felt different from every silence that had come before it. Less like absence, more like the beginning of something. I wasn't ready to call it forgiveness, but I was willing to call it a door. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not a moment. It's a direction. You don't arrive at it one Tuesday morning and plant a flag. You just find yourself, slowly without quite noticing, facing a different way than you used to. Less toward the wound, more toward what comes next. That's where I was when I drove back to Dayton for the first time in nearly 2 years. Not for a holiday, not out of obligation. My father had called and asked if I'd come. Just like that. "Would you come home for a weekend?" No occasion. No buffer of a holiday dinner to hide behind. That was new. Said yes. I packed a bag, got in my car, and made the drive I'd made 100 times before. Except this time it felt different in a way I couldn't quite name. The house looked the same. It always looks the same. That's the disorienting thing about going home after a long time. You've changed completely, and the porch light is in the exact same spot it's always been. My mother hugged me at the door longer than usual. My father was in the kitchen, which surprised me. Gary had never been a man who cooked, but apparently retirement had given him ambitions, because he was attempting a pot roast with a focused expression of someone defusing something. He looked up when I came in, nodded, said, "You made good time." That was his hello. And somehow, knowing him the way I did, it contained everything he didn't know how to say yet. We ate dinner, the 3 of us, and it was quiet in the way that families are quiet when everyone is being careful, and careful isn't a bad thing. After dinner, my father sat across from me in the living room, the same recliner I noticed, and said without preamble, "I owe you an apology, Marlene." Just like that. No build-up, no softening. Which, honestly, was more like him than anything emotional would have been. "What I said to you about your brother being the future, that wasn't right. You were sitting right there with everything you needed and I didn't see it. Or maybe I saw it and didn't think it mattered the way it did. Either way, that was wrong. And I'm sorry." I looked at my father, this man I'd spent years being furious at from a distance, and I thought about 17-year-old Marlene sitting in this same house, walking to her room in silence, staring at the wall. I thought about 2 jobs, legal pads, a wire transfer from Dolores that I still haven't fully paid back and she still refuses to let me. I thought about Pennsylvania and 4 minutes of crying and then driving the rest of the way anyway. "I know," I said. "Thank you for saying it." It wasn't a tearful reconciliation. There was no dramatic embrace. It was 2 people being honest in a living room on a Saturday evening, which is less cinematic but considerably more real. Cody came over the next morning with Tiffany and their daughter, a 2-year-old named Paige who had approximately 0 interest in the emotional complexity of the weekend, and spent most of her time arranging crackers on the coffee table in patterns only she understood. Cody and I hadn't talked, really talked, in years. We'd been polite at holidays, exchanged texts on birthdays, maintained the surface of a sibling relationship without much underneath it. He sat next to me on the back porch while Tiffany was inside with my mother and Paige was redistributing the crackers. "I didn't know," he said, "what they said to you about college. Not the full version. I found out later and I didn't handle knowing it very well." "What does that mean?" "It means I felt guilty and didn't do anything about it, which is the worst combination." He paused. "I'm sorry, Marlene, for my part in it. Even the passive part." I looked at my brother, genuinely looked at him, and thought about how easy it would be to hold the ledger open forever, to keep counting what he was given and what I wasn't. "Cody," I said, "I'm not going to pretend it didn't affect me. But I'm also not going to keep punishing you for something you didn't choose." He nodded. We sat there a while longer, watching Paige through the window, not saying much. It was, strangely, the most comfortable we'd been around each other since we were kids. Dolores came for dinner that evening. Of course she did. I'd called her the moment I decided to make the trip. She arrived with a casserole nobody asked for and immediately took over the kitchen with the energy of someone who has been waiting for this day for a long time and intends to enjoy every minute of it. At some point she caught my eye across the room and gave me a look that said everything. "See, told you," she had told me. Years ago, in a cold driveway, in a 10-year-old Buick, in a wire transfer that arrived by Friday. I mouthed thank you across the room. She waved it off like it was nothing. It was not nothing. Driving back to Maryland on Sunday afternoon, somewhere on the long flat stretch of highway, I thought about what I wanted the rest of this to look like. Not my career that had its own momentum now, its own direction. But this, the family part. The answer I kept coming back to was simple, even if the getting there hadn't been. I wanted to show up. On my own terms, from a place of choice rather than obligation. Not performing, not proving anything. Just showing up as the person I'd built myself into. In the family I decided to stay connected to despite everything. Was it perfect? Well, families don't become perfect. My father still doesn't ask questions easily. My mother still sometimes leads with Cody's news before mine. These things take longer than a weekend to fully shift. But something had shifted. Genuinely, irreversibly shifted. And 17-year-old Marlene, sitting on the edge of that bed in the dark, she deserved to know it would. So that's it. That's the whole complicated, occasionally absurd, deeply human story of how I got from that kitchen table in Dayton to a national news ticker in Maryland. And back again. If any part of this reached you, I'd love to know. Drop it in the comments. Honestly, every single one means something to me. And if something didn't sit right, tell me that too. Can take it. If this story stayed with you, a like means more than you'd think. Tells me this was worth sharing. And thank you, genuinely, for sitting with me through all of it.